It is my incredible pleasure to introduce Mr. Richard Davies. Enjoy. This is going to be good.
What we are doing to fix human-induced climate change is not nearly enough and isn't happening fast enough. The climate change train is accelerating because of economic growth, and it's really hard to slow a big fast thing down, and especially hard to slow a big fast thing down when it's still accelerating. So I'd like to tell you a bit more about my idea for fixing human-induced climate change and to tell you a bit more about why I'm in front of you. But before I do that, I'd like to take you on a journey. But before I take you on a journey, we need a legal slide. Thank you. Good. So let's begin the journey. What I want you to imagine for me right now is that the planet that we live on hasn't existed for 4.6 billion years. This planet has existed just for a single year. So the Earth was formed or created on the 1st of January. It took 87 days for the very simplest forms of life, microorganisms, to appear on the planet on the 28th of March. A further 8 months then went by until the 20th of November, when invertebrates appeared on the planet. Dinosaurs appeared at lunchtime on the 11th of December. And by that really tricky spot, like halfway through the afternoon on Christmas Day, they became extinct. That was a lot of work finding that image. We now leap forward to New Year's Eve. 23 minutes to midnight, modern humans, Homo sapiens, turned up just in time for the party. At 18 seconds to midnight on New Year's Eve, Buddha was born. At 1.8 seconds to midnight, electricity was discovered. And at just 1 second to midnight on the 31st of December, the Industrial Revolution began. And essentially, humankind, discovered how to unlock the incredible energy potential of coal to radically transform the way we were able to live on the planet. And at just a few tenths of a second to midnight, we've been having such a massive party. No regrets. Well, I think there are some, actually, which we'll get to in a while. But before we get to the gossip from this party that we've been having for all of this, well, 23 minutes, or really this last second since the Industrial Revolution, I'd like to tell you a bit more about who is standing in front of you. Well, I am Richard Davies, and I'm an ecological inventor, initiator, and investor. Good evening. Fantastic. You're awake. That's good. So I'd like to take you to 1972. This is me, 7 years old. I was a tiny bit obsessed with survival in a kind of cool Bear Grylls sort of way, with self-sufficiency, with self-reliance. I used to spend hours and hours and hours finding like old sweet tins and putting kind of stock cubes and fishing line and emergency space blankets in them to basically mean that wherever I found myself and whatever happened to me, I could survive. I would always have all of these things in this little tin to survive. My mother and father had lived through the Second World War, and I don't think they ever really knew what enough was. Rationing carried on, and I think they always struggled for money when I was growing up. Dad grew all his own vegetables and fruit, and Mom made many of my own clothes and cut my hair, as I think you can tell. That's definitely a mum haircut in this image. So with this provider anxiety, this feeling of would I ever have enough, that's led me to a really interesting place, which I'll tell you more about in a while. Well, at school, I took the science track, and then I did the very vocational and safe chemical engineering at university, and then I got a really cool job inventing a super ecological fiber called Tencel. Blimey. Do I still look like my photo? Like, no. Yeah, do I? That's great. So this ecological fiber called Tencel, I don't know if anyone has heard of Tencel or is wearing any Tencel. No, okay. Well, I did this for 10 years, so I was in a small team, essentially taking what was something that had been invented in the laboratory and scaling it up to eventually deliver the first commercial plant in America. I have 3 patents to my name, and I had a flippin' brilliant 10 years in a kind of big multinational where kind of there was, money was no object and we could do anything, and we did this wonderful stuff. So yeah, that's still doing really well out there. And then I did something really odd for someone with provider anxiety. I'd just been offered a job starting a new engineering office in Shanghai, and I decided to jack it all in. And with Megan, this is Megan. She is my daughter. She is my daughter. When she was 6 months old, I gave all of this up, and I started a not-for-profit sustainable energy and climate change organization called March's Energy Agency. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in a little while. We have to get back to the party. Remember, it's like 1 second to midnight. Sorry, that's the March's Energy Agency slide. And at this party, the gossip from the party is this. Okay, this is global population over the last 10,000 or so years. We can see this dramatic exponential growth that occurred at the start of the Industrial Revolution, principally. We can look at, what's this, GDP per capita over the long run. So this is actually wealth per person. So in your head, what you have to do is to multiply this by the preceding slide to get total GDP. So if you kind of multiply a not quite exponential graph by an exponential graph, you get, I don't know what that is, that's a lot. That's an awful lot of money. And we can also look at global CO2 emissions from, the Industrial Revolution began, at about 1780? And we can see 10,000 million tons of carbon, not carbon dioxide, so it's even more, 12,000 million tons of carbon dioxide being emitted now as a result of the party we're having. Clearly, we don't think that these 7.4 billion people at this party are going to run out of beer and snacks anytime soon. And now I just want to take you on a small sort of factual aside about coal. Coal obviously drove that industrial revolution. Well, that's lovely. I'm having some... Feels like TV, doesn't it now? So in the UK, every single day since 1882 until the 21st of April last year, we had used coal to generate electricity. So the UK had its first coal-free day of generating electricity for 135 years last April, essentially. So we have actually burnt 4.5 billion tons of coal over those 135 years to generate electricity. And in generating electricity in the way that we do in the UK, we waste 70% of the energy in that coal and only produce 30% of electricity energy from coal. And then in shipping that electricity around our country in wires and cables, we waste a further 7%, and then 47% of the electricity that people actually use is wasted through inefficient or unnecessary usage. I don't think we would call that innovation or InnoEnergy, essentially. So we're having a great party, and I don't think we're being particularly considerate to our neighbors. And maybe it might be the last party that humankind has unless we really learn how to become sustainable. Well, many people are waking up to sustainability. Are you all awake still? Yeah. Fabulous, cool. Well, I woke up to sustainability in 1999. I installed 4 kilowatts peak. So I've done all of this myself as an engineer. I fixed up my house to be carbon negative. I super insulated walls and floors, put photovoltaics on a new structure I'd built down the side of the house, essentially put solar thermal, biomass heating. So my house actually pays me to live there now, which is really lovely. That's a kind of cool sort of home. So really followed in my mum and dad's footsteps, really. And then the energy agency kind of was a bit like a tiny InnoEnergy. It was trying to essentially make the future happen early, to encourage innovation, to help kind of money flow and to kind of support good ideas with regard to sustainable energy. We worked with hundreds of communities, thousands of businesses, and tens of thousands of organizations. The Queen even invited me to Buckingham Palace to give me a medal. I got the MBE in the bit at the start, for essentially my services to sustainable energy. So this was, all the awards that the organization won. But even if every community had a sustainable energy agency like March's energy agency, that wouldn't be nearly enough. The problem is this continued economic growth. Almost the whole system is built on ever-ending need for almost pointless consumption, essentially, of stuff that we perhaps don't need. And I don't think the problem of economic growth is going to be fixed by conscious consumption or by better corporate social responsibility. I think we need a radical change in the way the economy is, to steady state economics and then to degrowth, certainly in the developed world. And Kate Raworth, this was my kind of pointless consumption slide. And I don't know if any of you have read Donut Economics. Well, Kate Raworth writes really brilliantly about the donut of the boundary of kind of social equality and then the kind of planetary boundary. And the fact is we have to find our way to be in this part of the donut. That a lot of the developing world doesn't have enough and is this side of the donut, and many of us in the developed world are living beyond the capacity of the Earth to support us, this four-planet lifestyle. So, the developing world doesn't have enough and needs more, and the developed world, most of it has too much. And last month, the Hothouse Earth Papers published this very stark report suggesting that the Earth is at real risk of flipping into an unsustainable, unstoppable runaway climate change, and that essentially incremental, slow change that we're witnessing in the energy system at the moment and food and agriculture isn't going to be enough. We need, radical, dramatic change, essentially. And similarly, earlier this month, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change essentially published its report suggesting that we need, based on Paris, the 1.5 degree centigrade stretch target, which 195 countries signed up to. So it was only Syria and Nicaragua who didn't sign up to the 1.5 degree C target. And maybe America will unsign shortly, who knows. But essentially, that again was calling for dramatic, rapid, far-reaching, unprecedented change in all elements of society. And it doesn't feel to me, from what I read in the paper and what I experience talking to people, that that's happening nearly fast enough yet. And this is lovely. You can do this online. So this was 1900. My grandmother was born. My mom was born in 1932. I was born in 1964. Megan was born in 1999. She finished high school then. My first grandchild may be born there, and Megan might retire. It's probably going to be over here, actually, isn't it? Perhaps she will never retire. That just shows you, in terms of average global temperatures, the time we're all living in. It's pretty stark. So it's almost like we're experiencing this kind of real-life version of the king's new clothes. Or the emperor's new clothes. Clean growth sometimes sounds as dumb to me as clean coal. We can't really have, however clean growth is, it's still growth. We won't be saving the planet with a better type of takeout coffee cup. So, what's my fix? I've kind of set out the problem. Well, I'd like to introduce you to €5. Essentially, for someone who was concerned or anxious about having enough, but also professionally have become very engaged with there being too much, so whether I had enough money personally to support my family, and whether there was going to be too much CO2 and too much damage to the climate, what I learned was that it was fundamentally about the money. Or stupid, that's what Bill Clinton said, didn't he? By taking a radically different approach to money, we can fix both problems, the human need for security and also human-induced climate change. And in doing that, we can probably fix many other challenges as well, depending on where we put the money we don't spend. But essentially, inequality, poverty, perhaps mental, physical health. There's a whole range of things that can be fixed on the back of a very different and radical approach to money. And by embracing this, there's also a super cool and really powerful side effect. And that is the side effect of everyone in this room only having to work 10.9 years. Okay, this is what I'm going to teach you in the next 9 minutes of my presentation. So if you look at the total CO2 in the system in the UK, and then look at the total amount of money spent, if you divide them, you find out that spending €5 in the UK emits 1 kilo of CO2. So not spending €5 saves 1 kilo of CO2. But also by not spending €5, you get a piece of freedom every year forever. And for me, not spending €5 gives me 4.2 minutes of freedom every year forever. So that's the 1 kilo of CO2, and this is the 4.2 minutes of freedom. So you're wondering kind of how does that work? Well, if you invest your €5 by not spending it into, let's just say, a sustainable fund in a stock market, looking back to the previous talk we've had, that will give you long-term 7% return on investment. So your €5 will give you 7% return each year. So if you net off 3% to take care of inflation, to make that real terms growth forever, that will leave you with 4%. Okay, so essentially your €5 every year has 20 euro cents of money babies, okay? And that is in real terms 20 euro cents. This will produce 20 euro cents every year forever whilst protecting your €5. That's the joy of essentially the way money works. And for you, depending on how much money you spend and how much money you need to live on, not spending €5 will also give you a piece of freedom. And essentially, that, for me, equates to living on €25,000 a year. And I'm assuming I'm with another human, in a relationship with another human, also having a passive income or an income of €25,000 a year. So I think kind of €50,000 for a household is probably enough money to live on. So this is not just a free lunch, it's a lunch you get paid to eat that fixes human-induced climate change, that gives you the afternoon off work as well. That's how powerful this is. So I kind of got onto this oh, sorry, there was a 7%. Yeah, we really needed a slide for that. And then 20 euro cents. Sorry, I'm falling a bit behind. And yeah, so this is the exchange rate for €5. It's 1.1 kilo of CO2. And for me, it's essentially 4.2 minutes of retirement every year forever. Essentially, for me, it took a bit longer. So I discovered this about the time I started working for March's Energy Agency. And essentially, it took me 15 years. So 15 years of not spending all of my income allowed me to retire 6 months before my 50th birthday, about 5 years ago. So I stopped working then. Yeah. So it's great that I've worked out how to do this personally. Oh, sorry, we need some more slides here. Yeah, I haven't really explained well enough. So to do the 10.9 years, it is pretty radical and pretty extreme that you have to keep €2 for every €3 you earn. So you're living on a third of your income. And that, by doing that for just under 11 years, you'll then be able to stop working and live on whatever €1 of your income was. So for instance, if you're let's use for easy maths, say you're earning €75,000 a year and you live on 25 and save 50, after 11 years, you'll be able to stop working, and the 50 you've saved each year invested will allow you to carry on living on €25,000 forever. So that's the idea. Now, that may be kind of crazily radical or too extreme for many of you. So there are different versions of that. So if you save 50%, so if you live on one of every €2 you earn, you can then retire in 15 years. And there's a whole range of different versions of this. And in tiny print here, you can see, or we can't quite see, but there's a bunch of countries. So India, their savings rate is just over 30%. The UK, the savings rate is pathetic. It's kind of 2-3% sort of thing. So there's a range of different countries there that are looking, at leading. So I think this is a really powerful idea for you guys to imagine, like, thinking in this particular way. But also by investing the money you don't spend in in ecological or sustainable projects, you can not only save the 1 kilo of CO2 by not spending the money, you can also then generate further CO2 savings by investing that in renewable energy, wind or photovoltaics, or some developing world stuff. So that's great for me that I've worked out how to do this personally, but we need to do this at scale. We need to essentially create a sort of ocean plastics blue planet moment. I've got out of sync with my slides. Sorry, this is how I live my life. So I can tell you, I could speak for hours about the stuff I do, but essentially, whether it's sourdough bread or just lovely stuff. It's really nice. I can work as little or as much as I want. I don't have to work anymore, essentially. So it's great that I've worked out how to do that personally, but we need some blue planet 2 or ocean plastics moment to kind of set this idea free in my head. Again, I don't know whether this is something that might happen or not, essentially. But this idea of financial security and ecological security through degrowth and through not spending, I think, is something we need to do. And if we look at the big numbers for 2 examples, so if we look at Europe and the world, the European Commission suggested that we need 177 billion of investment across the 28 member states to actually deliver a low-carbon, clean energy future. That's just 239 euros per person per year across the population of Europe. So although that seems like an incredibly big number, if every European citizen could invest 20 euros a month in the assets that are going to deliver this sustainable energy future, whilst getting probably a really good return on them, that we could deliver a low-carbon, sustainable energy Europe. So although 177 billion sounds a lot, if you could all find 20 euros a month from 5 less coffees, then we could stick that money in. You could all probably make significantly more than 7% return on that investment, and we have fixed Europe. And at a global scale, the International Energy Agency says we need $29 trillion between 2015 and 2050 to fix climate change. So this is based on the old 2 C target, so maybe a little bit more to meet the 1.5 C target. That's $829 billion a year, or just $111 per citizen per year globally. That's just $2 a week per person. Now, for some people living on kind of $2 a day, that might be kind of a lot of their income. But essentially, $111 per person to fix human-induced climate change doesn't sound like too much, especially when that's not a charitable donation, that's not an act of philanthropy, that's a solid asset investment in infrastructure and renewable energy projects to deliver a really secure, sustainable future. And I find it utterly ironic that the annual advertising spend globally is $600 billion. So if we stopped advertising, I know it's a kind of crazy, naive thing to stand up and be filmed saying, but if we stopped advertising and instead put that money into sustainable energy, we could essentially fix climate change globally. I just think that's a really powerful point. So maybe the future is already happening. I don't know, I'm not entirely confident that it is. Maybe, we see the transition towns movement across the world, we see the tiny house movement, we see the Simplicity Institute, the wonderful Simplicity Institute in Australia. We see FIRE, so financial independence and retire early. And there's somebody you must look up, my guru, Mr. Money Mustache. Has anyone ever heard of Mr. Money Mustache? He's a wonderful Canadian living in America. Google him, and he will tell you exactly how to do this. And maybe you're all sitting there thinking, well, listen to this baby boomer. He's had it pretty good. So you were thinking that, weren't you? Like, how can he be seriously telling us to spend or to live on significantly less than half our income? Does he not know how much rent is these days? Well, yeah, I'm sure there's some kind of truth in that, but there's also lots of many good things, in terms of perhaps how the internet allows us to live that didn't a while ago, and crowdfunding, peer-to-peer finance, financial technology. There's a whole load of really interesting things kind of cutting out incumbency of the banks and allowing finances to be done very differently. So there's probably as many good ways as less good ways from when I was younger. So I hope you like my idea. I think it's potentially revolutionary, and I'd really like you to start thinking about it. Maybe it will allow you to do kind of heart work and not sleep work, to find kind of a life of meaning and purpose whilst radically reducing CO2 through simplicity and elegant frugality. And I'm sure you all have really important work to do. Whilst also allowing the less developed parts of the world to grow. So essentially there's this possibility that by us having less, that allows the parts of the world that need it to have more, essentially. So I'm sure you all have really important work to do, even if you're not entirely sure what that is yet, but it's lovely not having to work. It allows you to do a very different sort of work, the right work for all the right reasons. So you need to remember that money equals CO2, €5 equals 1 kilo, that you can work for just 10.9 years and then retire or do cool stuff, that freedom is often much nicer than security, and experiences are always lovelier than most things, that time is perhaps nicer than money, and the most important thing, that the best things in life are never things. Picasso said that I'd like to live as a poor man with lots of money. And Groucho Marx once said, what have future generations ever done for us? Well, clearly future generations have never done anything for us. That isn't the point of future generations. But what I'd like you to imagine is that through our action, we're able to give future generations a really fabulous New Year's Eve party at some point in the future, the coolest party, the most sustainable party, a really beautiful party. And the thought I want you to go away with is that the next time you have €5 in your hand, I want you to feel the weight of 1 kilo of CO2 and to feel the pleasure of 4.2 minutes of freedom every year forever, and to decide what you're about to spend that €5 on, if that is really worth it. Thank you.